Welcome back to the EXP Podcast. I'm joined once again by my trusty companion, Luan.
Hello.
And we have two fantastic guests with us this week to talk about character art in a departure from our usually very environment-heavy schedule. So we have Mike and Crystal with us. Crystal, how about you start us up by introducing yourself?
So, hello, I'm Crystal Bretz, and I'm currently a senior modeler at Framestore right now. I specialize in characters there, though, so I'm only doing organic stuff. It's a bit about me.
Lovely. And Mike?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike-Amir El Frangi, and I'm a principal character artist at Quantic Dream. Previously, I worked at Ubisoft Bordeaux as a character artist. So, yeah, basically, I also do character for video games.
Lovely stuff. And to dive a little bit deeper then, we wanted to kind of find out a little bit more about you guys, about how you got started into games and your origin, your superhero origin stories. So as you were already saying stuff about yourself, Mike, how about you start us off and give us a little bit about how you got started?
No worries. So basically my story is a bit odd because I started a long time ago in a field that's like not related at all to character art or even video games in general. So I started, I used to live in the Caribbean and I did some programming studies for like 3 years there. But I didn't like it a lot, so I decided to change. I went to Belgium to study like video game art. So I did 4 years there. So 3 years was like the bachelor's degree, and there was like another year that you could specialize in to work on a project with a team and try to find funding and that kind of stuff. After that, I went to Paris where I joined a mobile game company called Pretty Simple Games. They worked on a big game called Criminal Case, and there I worked on a stylized mobile game, which was in 3D. And I mean, it was stylized, so it was like my main thing at the time. Unfortunately, the project got cancelled at some point, so I went to Ubisoft Bordeaux, where I worked on Ghost Recon Breakpoint, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and the first DLC that they made, which was Wrath of the Druids. And now I'm going to work at Quantic Dream as a principal character artist.
What made you go to Belgium?
Basically, I'm originally Belgian, so it was like easier that way, like to go to Belgium and everything. But I actually met someone when I was doing my studies in programming that told me that she did that school where I went to, which is the Haute École Albert Jacquard, by the way, I forgot to mention. And she told me it was like super nice and they had like a video game section and everything. So I was like, yeah, why not? Why not try it? So, yeah.
Fair enough.
Cool. I had a question about the time that you worked on the stylized game. Were you already starting to work as a character artist at that time, or?
Yes. So basically, I was hired as a character artist. Basically, we did everything character art related. So we did a bit of concept art because we didn't have any concept artist. So we did like some concept arting, 3D sketching, I would say. And yeah, basically we did everything character art related. So high poly, low poly, baiting, texturing, and putting them in the engine.
Cool. Well-rounded.
That's how you like it, though. Like, the more well-rounded, the better.
All right, then, and we can throw it over to Crystal.
Sorry, I'm taking a sip of that water.
Illegal.
Gotta hydrate.
Yeah, so basically my origin story is very loop-de-loop and not exactly linear. So in film, I mean, really, you're lucky if you get hired as a character artist right out of the gate. It's extremely difficult in film. Like, extremely extremely difficult. It's like one of those things that everyone going to animation school just wants to be a character artist, and it's extremely difficult unless you're amazing. And I wasn't amazing. I sucked. So I just found the most interest in doing it, and it made me more passionate. And there was a bunch of stuff I was really good at, and then that was the thing that I was just average at, but I found more joy in it. So I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do no matter what. So when I first went to school at Vancouver Film School, I studied there like 7 years ago, or almost 7 years ago now. And so I went there and I was just about to graduate. I was applying for jobs and I got accepted to the Mpc Lighting Academy. And then I also had another job offer for a generalist position at a small TV studio. So one job was where I was just going to be lighting full time as a on feature films, which was really cool, like Lion King and stuff like that. And then the other job was just being a generalist on sort of smaller TV shows, maybe kids movies, stuff like that. Both were cool, but I didn't know which path to take. I talked to a teacher. He recommended I go through the generalist path. So I actually took the generalist job and I worked there for 2 years. Started as a junior, somehow got upgraded to a mid. I was just biding my time, and the teacher that I talked to, he recommended that I take that job specifically because at the lighting job, you'd never get your hands on any models at all. And at this generalist job, you would sometimes get to model something. Because as a generalist, you animate, rig, track, basically everything before compositing. So I was lighting stuff, and it was just a random slew of jobs, really. And after about maybe a year and a half, I finally had enough models that I've kind of scrounged together at this job to put together in a demo reel to apply for a proper modeling job. Because that was all the hype. You had to have all this professional work to actually be considered at most of these big feature film studios. And then I finally got a job after 6 months of applying and bothering the recruiters at Method saying, I'm good enough, let me in. Literally, they were very adamant on telling me that my skill set was not to the level they wanted. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to make it there. So I was working on personal projects and doing extra stuff. And then eventually they finally accepted me because they had to hire a bunch of people for a bunch of Marvel shows. So when I got in, the first thing I was working on was Black Panther, which was just like blowing my mind because it was such an upgrade. And then after that at Method, I wasn't getting any character models at all. And I was telling them I want to be a character artist. And they were like, well, that's nice. Pat on the head, you know? And so all I was doing was just props and environments. And I kept trying and doing personal projects, and my evil, conniving self was like, okay, well, how do I get them to realize that I can do characters? So I did a couple personal projects at home, and I brought those in to my leads and my supervisors, and I was just asking for feedback from everybody that I could that knew that I wanted to be put in this position. And after they saw what I could do personally, they were like, wow, we have this big Kraken on Fantastic Beasts. Do you want to work on it? And I was like, yes, I would love that. Thank you. So then that's actually how I transitioned to being a character modeler. It was like, it was not a just hired in kind of thing. It was a long approach.
It seems like it's always been like that though, right? Like incredibly difficult to get into it straight away, and the standards are too high.
Honestly, it's difficult. It's like I find in games, you tend to just be hired into the position. But in film, you have to really loophole your way around. And unless you get lucky with the one character artist position and you just happen to be the one that stands out of the 500 people who applied, you know, it's just how the cookie crumbles. But yeah, ever since that one Kraken, I had a little bit of a sidestep as well. I went to Braun, and I was working on an animated feature there called The Willoughbys, and I was doing look dev and groom on there, which is not even modeling related. But that's where I learned how to do all my groom. which was a good asset to learn. And then I moved to Montreal, and I've been working as a character artist ever since, because I finally had enough stuff to finally advertise myself as a character artist.
You did it.
I did it. It was a long process of probably the whole 7 years I've been doing this, but yeah.
Actually, I had the same, like Luan said, and what you actually said, Crystal, because you said that in video gaming, like, people get hired straight away. But actually, when I was in school, people were telling me that it was actually hard, like, to get hired as a character artist. And I don't know if I've been lucky or if it's not true, but I've heard from people that it's actually hard, like, to get into gaming as a character artist, where some people would say, oh, you need to start as a generalist, like maybe you did. So I don't know.
I think that comes from the fact that there's just a lot less jobs for that than anything else, really. Because, like, the character team tends to be a lot smaller, right? And in the junior roles, even less so. So I don't know. That's where I think that might come from.
That is true, and I think it might be the same for environment art. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I've seen, like, some people starting, for example, as a QA or whatever other job, just to get their foot in the industry, and then, like, transitioning into, like, the job they want, like, to do.
That's that one's a bit of a tough path, the QA to art. They're just two different careers.
I think that's exactly the same transition as what I was saying with the lighting. Like, in film, there's a lot of like academies and stuff like that to help juniors transition, but a lot of the time they're not actually aimed towards the thing you want to do. So sometimes when you take one of those, QA jobs to get in the door, sometimes it's kind of a little bit more deadly than good, because you're doing something completely different. At least you're in the door, but it's hard to get out of it if you're not aggressive on your personal projects.
It's a shame we don't know anyone who did that, right?
I know a few people personally who've gone from, like, there's one person I'm working with right now at Framestore, and he's actually in the modeling department, and he used to be a runner at Framestore. But again, it's a long process from going from being a runner, which is technically the QA position, but at a film studio. Runners just run around filling fruit bowls and stuff.
There seems to be more stories of runners getting noticed, though, than I think. In QA, it's definitely very tricky because it's
not artistic.
It's not artistic at all, but also, in my experience, they kind of don't want to let you go, right? So you can want to go to art, and you can do as much sort of like trying to network with artists and stuff, but they still, like, there's definitely a notion that QA is not dev, right? And because of that, even just the structure of QA can be very, very different.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure if Kem were on this one, he'd be able to tell lots of stories about our time together at a certain studio where I worked in QA, and he didn't. But yeah, it's tricky. It is.
Well, how about we do a podcast on that? Because that sounds actually quite interesting. And, like, even I started in QA barely. Like, I did very little bit of QA, but that was mostly as a thing I did throughout uni. But yeah, let's do a podcast on that. That's something.
Yeah. We can get some QA folks in. That'd be cool. Yeah, but generally, I think all round the notion of trying to get your foot in the door through one way and transition isn't. It's. I think it's sort of an older sentiment. A lot of guys back in the day did this. I mean, if you've got any really old boys at wherever you work, guys who've been around 20, 25 years, like, a lot of them, university didn't even teach games courses, so they looked up a few things in their spare time, messed around with some things, shook someone's hand, they got a job working on some game, and, like, the difference to nowadays, just trying to get your foot in the door as a junior role is night and day. There were so few people back in the day that even knew how to use the software, whereas now it's like, you're talking like 500 people applying for junior roles.
Exactly. It's like you're in a sea of talent, and it's just, there's a lot of people who are really good. That makes it really difficult to stand out when you're already in the studio doing something that's not artistic, but it's not impossible because you get your foot in the door and you make some friends. And at the end of the day, I think they'd probably give you the benefit of the doubt over hiring someone new that may have a horrible personality. So you never really know.
And I mean, that right there is an entire other situation as well, right? Where we have the people who are slightly less skilled, but quite personable and seem to have like a good mindset on them that would probably work well in the studio. And then you have the people that are really highly skilled that maybe are less personable. And of course, like there's people that are both. But I find that in hiring, that's the part that you really struggle with, because you either get a lot of people that aren't very skilled, but are kind of just okay, and but they're quite nice, and you could tell that they would put in the work, or you get the people that are really highly skilled, and so it's just about who you hire at that point, and it kind of makes it even more difficult for the people that are less skilled, because I find that there's a tendency to hire, at least from some of my experiences, tendency to hire the people that are more skilled but are more likely to maybe not pass probation or get fired later down the line or have troubles with the studio than the person that you can teach the skills to, because I think you can very easily teach skills, right? It's the personal side that is the more difficult one.
I agree entirely, because I find like that is a really big thing that is a priority mostly in film studios. I'm not sure about, I've only worked at one game studio before, but at film studios, I know that they put high priority in trying to find people who fit with their team, because it's the worst thing in the world when you're trying to, like, as much as you think when you're applying, everyone's out to get you and you're on your own. As soon as you get into a studio, it's a team environment. You're working together. You're making something amazing, right? Like you're trying to make a film or a game or something, and you have to collaborate. These people could be against you in the applications, but once you're together, you're working as a team, like you're developing, and the teamwork skill doesn't really work when people don't talk to each other, like you end up making something way more horrible. And then like, if you don't have communication and people don't get along, than you would if people got along and maybe they don't have as advanced skill sets, but they can figure it out together.
Yeah, I actually do agree, and I think it's the same in the video game industry. I mean, you still have like a skill threshold that you need like to maintain, like when you hire people. But I think like hiring like the good person that would fit with the team is also like something very important, because basically if he or she, sorry, if they're missing certain skills or like some art skills, I would say, you can still teach it to them, and it's easier like to teach it to them than to hire someone that is like that doesn't like completely fit with the team, and then that has like the best skills in the world, but he or she would be like the worst person to work with.
Yeah, you can't really teach someone to be nice.
I mean, you can. It's just not worth the effort.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think games especially can attract a lot of people who just are very lone wolfy. Like they don't, those non-team players.
We have a lot of those in film too.
Yeah, I think that's just people, dude.
Just people.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I try not to talk to people when I can avoid it. So
I find it's just the people in this industry, but I do find that when we have a team that everyone does like to talk, I find that we have this cool vibe with everything, things just seem to flow and work, and you can talk to, like, for example, in film, things are not as like, you're not just a character artist. You don't get to model, texture, look dev, and present your character and whatever, right? In games, I know you get to basically take your whole character from start to finish most of the time.
Yeah, it really depends. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
really depends. Like sometimes you get to do like some parts of the characters and maybe others, but not all the time you like do a character from scratch to finish.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just talking from my one experience at the VR studio because it was smaller, so I was a full character artist. So at that moment, I did go from start to finish, but I'm sure probably bigger studios you don't. You probably split up the tasks like you're saying. But in film, it's very, very separatist. Like, you are a department and you only model, and that's it. And in the modeling team, they have people who specialize in environments, and what they call it is hard surface. And then they have people who specialize in organic. So those are the people who mostly do sculpting and stuff like that, and anything creature characters. You'll never texture, you'll never do anything except for the main tasks of modeling. And unless you get moved to the texture department, then all you'll do is just texture. And, vice versa, you go to groom, you just groom. So most of the time in film, we just model.
Yeah, I've never really enjoyed the compartmentalized nature of film production. I think it's it's nice if that's just what you enjoy doing, but I don't know. I kind of prefer a little bit of everything, personally.
I love it because I came from a generalist background, so I love to do everything. But I mean, sometimes it's just really nice to just specialize in one thing because you get really good at it.
Yeah, you get very good at it, which is of course great as well, right? So
I actually do agree with you. I mean, it's nice like to do different stuff, like for a change. Like for example, you get to do texturing, or you get to do like high poly sculpting, or even retopology or stuff like that. But sometimes it's nice like just to focus on one aspect of the whole thing.
I think it's entirely dependent on the person, right?
I agree.
Yeah. Like there's moments where, like, for example, at Framestore, I can be an asset because I know groom and because I know texture and because I know look dev, which look dev is just material generation. But they basically, because I know those things, if let's say we get slow in modeling, they may move me to one of the other departments and I will just work there under a different department head. And I'll just work there for a bit. And then they can move me back to modeling when stuff gets quick again. So it kind of makes you more versatile so that you don't actually lose your contract or your job all the time, which is nice because in film, technically you just work contract to contract. And if there's no work at the time when your contract gets renewed, then it's nothing against you or your skill. It's just they don't have money to pay you because there's no jobs, right? There's no work. So being a generalist can kind of help you in the film industry, even if you don't use it all the time.
Yeah.
Be interested to hear a bit more about the kind of contract nature of film, and sort of how that compares to our experience in games. So how long typically is a contract then?
You're lucky if you get a year. Lucky. It really depends. I've been offered 1 month contracts. I've been offered 3 month contracts. I had a 6 month contract when I worked on the Willoughbys for like the look dev and groom stuff. I think I had an 8 month contract at DNEG, but basically nobody really offers over a year because when they do their bidding and they check all the, because we don't work on intellect like our own IP. We work on clients' IP, so it all depends on the clients and what we've bid on and what we actually were awarded to work on. Because in film, they bid on certain sequences of movies, and they basically do that a year in advance before anybody even knows what movies are coming out. They bid on them, and then once they know what movies are coming in, that's how they know how many people to hire and how long for.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of industry in that sense. But even in games, right? Like for the contractors, it entirely depends on the country you're in. Because whilst the UK does have contracts, you'll find way more permanent roles in the UK than you would in the US, where almost everything, well, not almost everything, but a lot of it is contract based, right? And I think that's just more dependent on the country. But the film industry is very different in that sense.
Actually, I had a friend that worked at Illumination Studios in Paris, and he told us that most of the time he had like one month or 3 month contracts, but other than that, it was like basically month to month, and he didn't know if he was like gonna get laid off or whatever. But in France, the video game industry is like also contract based, but we also have like permanent contracts. So yeah.
I find that happens a lot with because animated features work a lot more different than actual feature films. And in that, I mean, like, they're actually making their own IP, just like a game studio, and it can take 3 to 5 years to make, just like a game. So, and then they sell it to Netflix or somebody, and during that time, you sell it before it's finished. And then basically they have an input on how they want this, to scene to go, or this to happen, or this to look. But up until the point where they actually sell it, they don't have an input. But what I'm saying is the contracts and everything can work a bit differently that way as well, because of the length of time and because it's own IP. So sometimes they hire you for longer, sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's month to month, because they never know if they can switch you departments, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely, different regarding video games, because you work on you're gonna get work anyway if the project like launches. Usually they have like pre-prods of other projects at the same time. So yeah, most of the time they do like 6 month, 12-month, maybe a year and a half contracts, at least in France, and then they do like permanent contracts after that.
Okay. Yeah, I think, like, to become a staff employee, which is what they call it here, you got to be a senior, number one. It's very difficult if you're not a senior. And number two, it's the odds have to be in your favor, kind of thing. Like, if they really need to keep you because they have a lot of work, you have a lot of sway to convince them to offer you a staff position. But most of the time, unless they need you really bad and you hold it to them, they won't offer you anything staff related, because that comes out of their pocket. Film industry is just really, really bizarre because of the whole client thing.
Yeah, I think especially in the US and Canada, right? Companies can like lay off more easily than I'd say in France, where like the workers have like more protection than in the Americas.
Well, in Montreal, it's actually different. Quebec law is after 2 years, you basically become a staff employee, because they legally can't. Like, so basically, if they renew you for a year and then they renew you for another year, after that moment, if they renew you again, you basically they force the Quebec government forces them to hire you as staff, because you can't work for them for longer than 2 years unless they do.
Okay, it's actually the same in France. Basically, you have like up to 1 year and a half, I think, as a fixed term contract, and then if they renew you after that, they have like to hire you as a permanent worker there. So I think it's like kind of similar than Montreal's situation. At least
The
Quebec.
French know where it's at. They know how to keep people employed.
Yeah.
It's UK is the same with the 2 years, but it's not uncommon for that to mean people get 18-month contracts and not renewed and things like this, to stay under the 2-year limit, which is
Weaselly.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky all around. I think a lot of it's not limited to just games and things. Obviously, there are plenty of other jobs that operate on the sort of same contract basis. With film, like you're saying, it's that they generally like, you don't have such a long length of time either, so they're never going to give you a year and a half contract if they're only going to have guaranteed work for 6 months. It would make no sense for them.
It's hard for them to commit unless they know they have the budget to keep paying you forever.
Exactly.
Which I can understand, right? Like, when you work for a client, it's as if you're working freelance, except they have a more stable client, other than you. So you don't know what your month-to-month income is going to be. There might be 2 months of time when there's absolutely no show to work on and nobody's paying for these artists, right? So it's hard. Like, it's easier for them if they can just let you go and come back in 2 months. But a lot of studios, like, for example, Framestore, would rather try to find a way to keep you. So during COVID, I think they they didn't lay anybody off. Sometimes they didn't renew contracts if they couldn't transfer you to another department that needed people. So they have like a really deep understanding of trying to hold on to their talent, because that's the other thing is if they keep laying people off or not renewing contracts, then they lose, number one, the trust in that person, so they may never come back, and number two, they lose the talent of that person as well, right? Like they understand that to keep things flowing and keep the quality of work up, they need to keep the artists. Like, just makes sense. So
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's tricky on both fronts, really, isn't it? It's like as an employer, they kind of are, their hands are tied a little bit, but also it's as someone who's working, that kind of lack of security can be a big something that just a large source of stress. I know that I've had periods of time with stuff, with contracts that you don't know whether or not how long they're gonna last or what stuff's gonna come through. And
yeah, I think as long as you're like in film, at least, as long as you're working in a hotspot or a hub for visual effects or something like this, like for example Vancouver or Montreal, it's very like once you pass that 3-year mark of working in the industry, most of the time, unless it's a low point, like not a lot of jobs happening, recruiters will just reach out to you and you won't really have to look too hard. But before 3 years, I'd say it's still pretty difficult for most people, because
definitely a magic number, isn't it? Like I think games as well, it's that tree. And also it seems like all recruiters want to fight over the same pool of already very eligible people. They're not so keen to look for fresher talent.
There's also the issue of depending on the company, right? Like I find that the external companies here in the UK, so American companies or maybe French companies, they tend to get a lot more contracts, especially on a junior to mid level. Whereas the British companies are a little bit more, well, they tend to just straight up hire full time, at least from the experience here. But if you are getting a contract, it's likely going to be for junior to mid, without a doubt. If you're getting senior contracts, I'd say probably think twice about that company. That I'm not too sure about moving your whole life around as a senior who probably has a family. So yeah, I don't think a senior contract's worth it.
I think it's basically the same in France. Usually if you see contracts, it's probably more like for junior or mid position, like you said. And even mid position, like people are starting like to push for more like permanent contracts. I mean permanent positions. And yeah, if you're a senior, usually you can like negotiate like a permanent position easily.
Yeah, I mean that's what happened with me here at PG. I don't think they'd mind saying the fact that they offered me a contract and I said no, and then I'm like, okay, here's have full time. Yeah, because if you're denying a senior because of a contract, like you should never deny a senior. Well, not really, but like to get a good senior in is very difficult. And if you're just gonna offer them a contract and they'll be like, no, I'm like, okay, cool, bye, then you're really making a huge mistake. So
I think we mentioned it on another podcast, but I know from certain people I've spoken to, like recruiters at studios, it can often seem to a lot of juniors that the ratio of senior to junior jobs is skewed, but often studios will just keep a senior job listing open all year round, because if someone is, they get a good senior come in, they'll find space for them, right? Because they're just so like someone with that level of experience and skill is so valuable.
Yeah.
I wish that was the same for film, but we got those senior contracts.
Yeah, it's just unfortunately different, isn't it?
It sucks, but it is what it is, and sometimes it can actually be a blessing. I hate saying that, but when you're a senior and you're on contracts, like you're not really struggling to find jobs. People are recruiters are messaging you like, once a month, maybe, like just trying to see where you're at. If you want to work for them, here's these jobs, blah, blah. Right. But, in the grand scheme of things, like once your contract's up, you can take a month or two off if you want to, plan around, have a vacation, and then set up another job to start. And you can collect unemployment insurance during that time because it was a contract job. And as long as you did not quit, you can collect unemployment insurance in Canada, at least. So you can kind of have an income while you go on vacation, right? Like you can kind of plan it to work out in your favor as long as you never quit a job.
Yeah, I guess also you have more chances to negotiate a higher salary. Like if you're somewhere permanently, they're gonna tell you to wait until your yearly review, right, before pay comes into a talk. So you get
100%.
Maybe one slot a year. But if you've got 3-month contracts or something, each time you get that new contract, you can start that conversation.
That's what's worked in my benefit from jumping around a lot, as well as salary increases. Like every time you agree to a new contract, it's a chance to get another pay raise. So jumping contracts can actually be pretty good for your salary.
Yeah, and I mean contracts themselves tend to pay higher anyway, right? So at least on an entry situation.
I think in general, it even works like for video game, even though we tend like to stay longer in companies, but like switching companies every few years can be like a good way to increase your salary.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, I've jumped jobs every 6 months, so sometimes, it just works out that way. But I find that film is also like once you're after a certain amount of years, there's studios just poach you. They try their hardest. They reach out to you on LinkedIn and the recruiters are like, we're doing this project. Here's all the interesting things. You want to just have a chat? I know you're hired, but like, do you want to have a chat?
Yeah. It's no different in games as well. It's exactly like that.
Yeah. Yes, it's quite wild. I mean, I probably get at least like 2 emails a week, and I'm nobody, right? So I can't imagine how many like Luan's probably like got like that Harry Potter scene with all the letters coming through the
and they're all NFT projects.
Oof.
You love those.
Same.
I feel that.
Same.
On a slightly different, continuing on film versus game, but I'm moving away from contracts. Workflow wise, I guess Crystal, because you had that experience of working at one game place versus film. I guess, do you want to just go over some sort of major differences that we mentioned about being more specialized, but kind of in general workflow for film versus game? What are some of the big differences that you know?
Yeah. So, but basically, from my experience, maybe I'll say something wrong, and Mike, you can correct me. But from my experience, I'm pretty sure both film and games work with scan data most of the time when you're doing a digi-double of somebody or just a human character. Sometimes maybe not in games, but in film all the time. You'll get a scan of whatever celebrity. But I think the major difference between film and games, in my opinion, would be the end output, like the entire process to making the character. Like game characters look phenomenal before you optimize it. But, and it's the same thing for film. But the thing is that with film, we have to work extremely clean all the way through the entire process. So it can actually slow things down quite a bit. And that's why things take quite a while, is because our topo has to be clean. And at the end result, it's actually pretty dense. And depending on the studio as well, they have different pipelines. They require different things to send down to other departments. But you have to work extremely clean because of that. So like no triangles, no anything ugly in the mesh, can't be disgusting. Every single object on the model has to be the same polygon density from everything. So the shoes, the pants, whatever. And the body inside the costume as well has to be pretty snug. So we actually keep the body. Sometimes we keep the full thickness to the clothes because we simulate the clothing. So they need to have both sides of thickness sometimes. And the body has to be proper so that the cloth can sit on it properly, right? So if the body just looks really limp and gross inside, or you cut it away, then there's nothing for the simulator, the CFX people to use.
Mm.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but and then the other thing is we have a lot of UV sets, so we use like a lot of UDIMs and texture tiles compared to games. We can just basically go infinite. I've seen environments use 172 4K textures for just like I'm not kidding, 174 4K textures just for like albedo, and then another 174 for spec. You know,
I mean, that's just like my game assets. Don't tell anyone though.
But that's an environment. But for probably like a character or creature, like if it's a hero, superhero thing that's going to be in your face, we may use like anywhere from 25 to 50 tiles, which is a lot of texture.
Yeah, I find handling all that's probably a bit of a nightmare, isn't it?
It really is, because after a certain point where you publish and send it down the pipeline, those UVs can't change.
Yeah.
UV sets have to remain the same. And so, you know, maybe a couple weeks later, after everyone's worked on it, they want model changes. And at that point, you have to be really, really, really delicate with how you change this model.
I mean, is it that the reason why there are like so many jobs? I would say, like for example, you'd be the only one modeling, and this person would be like the only one texturing and all.
Well, yeah, exactly. So basically, when my job as a modeler would be to model and lay out the UVs, and then the texture artist would literally just take it and texture on it. But then, like, there's a bunch of other people, like the rigger has to have their own UVs, the groomer has to have their own UVs as well. So that's why you have so many UV sets, because every department needs their own UVs. God damn it!
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's just a lot of stuff. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't say it's like similar in video gaming, because, yeah, I mean, if we are like working on a realistic character, or we need like some likeness, we would use some 3D scans. If it's like a realistic game, I would say. If it was like stylized, we would make base meshes, but we wouldn't like use 3D scans, and then we'd build up our character on top of it. But yeah, the main difference is that in film, it seems like you need like to keep all the like the body, the layers, and all that stuff, because you need like to simulate, right? But in video gaming, I mean, it's all about like optimizing the character and making it look cool at the same time. So everything that's not visible should be like deleted, and yeah, I mean, it's always like using smokes and mirror to make the character looks badass, but at the same time, it needs like to run on a bunch of different consoles and on PC at the same time. So
yeah,
I would say
our characters just need to be rendered for one image.
yeah, basically. But I think, like you said, like that would be like the main difference between VFX and video game, because the more we're like the technology is advancing at all, and the more the characters in video gaming are like reaching a level that you can see in VFX and movies. Because I mean, just have to look at recent games like Horizon Forbidden West and Uncharted and God of War and all that stuff. Like the characters are still impressive, but yeah, it's always like the compromise between making them look good and making them like run on every machine possible.
I think that's like a thing with film, is like we don't need to worry about how it runs. We just need to make sure the Maya file opens. That's the only restriction, really, and you can put a lot of million polygons in there, but but the thing is, it's not free. You know, like a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that you're free to do whatever you want. but you're really not. Like, especially with characters, maybe with environments you can go a bit ham in film, because it doesn't matter if you've got triangles and stuff like this, but you have to be really specific with how things are topologized and stuff like that with characters, and density of meshes have to be matching. Because if you have a body underneath that's really, really dense, and then you have clothes on top that are not dense at all, then you're going to have a lot of crashing, and simulation is going to hate you, and it's going to be a big ordeal. So
I would say like the topology thing is like also used in video gaming. I mean, you'd want like all your meshes to have like the same topology, I would say. But if, for example, you had like some triangles, or if this mesh has like less topology because you need to optimize it and it's not really visible, it's not that big of a deal. So I don't think we have like the same strict constraints as VFX and movies in general.
Yeah, I mean, I get it tends to be anything that's that animates in game has to have it's quite a lot more strict in that sense. Well, not animate, but specifically the form.
Yeah, like the faces on video game character like need to have like quads and have like a clean topology on them. But I mean, if you have like triangles behind the ears, it's not going to be like such a big deal,
Yeah, I think that's like the same, except they just literally nobody likes triangles. You see anyone in film sees a triangle, or you're like, oh, gross. It was hard for me to work at the game studio because I was like, had to reprogram my brain that triangles are good. They are a good thing.
Meanwhile, I'm an n-gon master. Everything's an n-gon. Because people are way too scared of n-gons, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Anywho, on to the next topic, Tim.
I think I have very limited experience in even dealing with animators, but from what I've seen in games, like there's a lot of reuse. There's to try and get, if rigs can fit between characters, or if they can reuse animations between stuff. It's like there's a big push to try to get things to line up and match. I don't know if that's such a big thing in film.
In film, it's actually funny because we have one base mesh, and we usually just use it for everything. If we're doing digidoubles, we'll just use that one base mesh. Every studio has this basically. If they don't, then they're whack. But almost every film studio will have their own base mesh that they've made, and it's prepared, and it's already been pre-rigged, and it already has face shapes and everything. So like, any blend shapes to make facial expressions. Obviously, they need to be fixed to match whatever celebrity you're making, or, something like that. But it gets you like 90 or 80% of the way there in terms of all the work you have to do. So essentially, also on this base mesh, there'll also be a bunch of UVs and UV sets and everything. So when you're actually making your character, you basically just take this base mesh, mush it into the right shape of your character, and maintain all the UVs, UV sets and everything. And it's actually super easy for the rigger to just slap on their rig and then throw the blend shapes on, and you're rolling. You have a character. You just need the animators to do their magic, right? With creatures, it's a bit different because we don't really have anything. Like if you're working on a dog, there might be previously a dog done before, but it may not actually work. You might have to change the topology. You might have to change the UVs. So creatures are a bit different, but most digidoubles are all very, very similar workflows in a film pipeline.
I wanted to ask you, when you're like working on a likeness of an actor, and you get the scans, I guess the scans come with different textures like albedo and that kind of stuff, or do you have like to redo the textures? And on the 3D model, do you have like to add more stuff to the sculpt, or do you ship it as it is?
Yeah, so our scans most of the time are trash, and we don't usually use them most of the time.
All right.
It's mostly used as like they can be good, and when they're good, that's great. But even then, it's like you have to make a body, and when they scan someone, mostly the time they scan them with clothes, right? So you have to assume what their body looks like underneath, and you have to fill in the blanks, and then you have to model the costume on top to match the same dimensions and like the same essential silhouette as the scan, right? So you do have to add all the extra details and everything. And sometimes there's even stuff in the scan that you don't see. Like if, for example, some guy has long sleeves and there's a shirt underneath, we actually have to sometimes add the shirt underneath because when they do see effects, the shirt might come up and you might see it, right? It depends on entirely the shots and like how what we've been briefed on, how we address those situations. But for the most part, I would say the scan is like somewhat useful. We get also fax scans, and that's what we do for the face to like wrap the face on. And we get a lot of face detail from the fax scans because they're a lot more high res. But most of the time, we do need to sculpt a lot more because maybe sometimes there's chunks of his face missing. Sometimes there's a lot of bumps in there that don't actually exist on the guy. Sometimes the eyes are in the wrong, like the eyelids are kind of a bit goofy. So,
I mean, I think we can say it's the same for video game. Basically, we have a scan, but we don't use it as it is. We have like a bunch of cleanup to do on the face, or usually it's most of the time it's like faces we use for scans, and you still have like to redo some of the shapes on top of it, like to make it look good or just to clean some stuff. So
yeah, I would say that sounds pretty similar. Like the whole entire starting process is probably the most similar. But then the moment you guys get to optimization, I think that's where things just get goofed. Like we have to keep everything clean. So our high poly can't just be a high poly. It has to be an operationable high poly. So we're, there's no dynameshing. There's no this and that. There's no fixing stuff to bake.
so
there's no baking.
so basically subdivision levels and clean topology.
Yes. So our actual mesh that we'll render is usually pretty dense. And if we need any more like high definition details like seam wrinkling and stuff like that, then we'll add a displacement map on top. So we never bake anything down. It's usually just all in the model.
We have slowly been moving towards more alike workflows, both in characters and in environments with film. In games, though, like I find every now and then you pick up technique that's like, oh, they do that in film, and we can do that now. So yeah, as technology progresses, we do get more aligned workflows. And I mean, you can see companies like Epic pushing for that quite heavily, especially since they want their engine to be used by both, right? So yeah, I think as time goes on, we'll get they won't be the exact same, but we'll get a lot of cross pollination between them.
I already see that happening. I took the Unreal Virtual Production Fellowship. And it was crazy to see what they're implementing and how that's kind of connecting the two worlds. Virtual production is getting very, very heavy in the film land. A lot of they're building like giant virtual production sets, and they're filming on the virtual production sets, and studios are required to build stuff before the film is even filmed.
Yeah, it's a very different approach, right? But it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting to see that like come across the film now.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
Nice. On a not film at all, but talking of different workflows, we have the master of crazy 3D printed monsters with us, so it would be remiss to not talk a little bit about the approach to making characters for 3D printing. So Mike, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with making some insane things for that?
Yeah, sure. I'm no master at all, but yeah, I can talk a bit about it.
Don't lie, you're a master.
Thank you. But yeah, actually, I also wanted to say that 3D printing is also like a bit of a different process, even though it's like similar to what you would do in ZBrush for VFX or for video games. The only difference I would say is that it doesn't need to be optimized for being displayed on a screen, but more like it needs to be optimized and taken care of, like to be printed, which like comes with its own constraints at all. But usually, what you would need to do basically when you work on a model for 3D printing is like think of the end result, like how it will like look as a model, as a printed model. Basically, you'd have like different sizes usually. For video, what am I saying? Not video games, for like wargaming. Usually the size are like 32 millimeters, so it's like fairly small. And because of that, you'd want like to have all your details exaggerated. So instead of making, I don't know, for example, an armor with all intricate details and all that stuff, maybe you want instead like to tone down on the detail and only do like the base shapes and like the base I would say details, like the bigger ones, because when you're gonna like 3D print them, all the smaller details will get washed away. And if you have like bigger models, then you can like go crazy on the details and all. So that's what usually I like to do, is like to try to make some more detailed models, because I know like some people like to print them as big like statues. It's always like nice to see more details than just having like simple shapes for armor or bandages or stuff like that.
I was gonna say for like large sculpts, like you might get from Hot Toys or something like that. Their digital sculpts are a lot more detailed, aren't they? In that sense, because they're coming in at like what quarter life size and things like that for the final sculpt. So they go pretty in the detail on those things. But I imagine that for and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but for to make a smaller model, you probably still like to go as detailed as you can and then just reduce the detail later, right?
I mean, it really depends, because if you know that you're gonna make like a fairly small model, which is like, I would say like a basic soldier in an army, and that soldier is gonna get printed on a 32 millimeter scale. I mean, you also have like time constraints when working on these, so maybe it would be like be better like to not put in any details and just the base shapes, and just move on onto like other stuff that needs to be detailed, instead of making the details and then cleaning them afterwards. So I think it's also like something that you need to think before like doing the actual details, I would say.
I have a question about like the details, because I know some printers print a lot more details for small stuff. And like if someone's hiring you for this, are they telling you and briefing you on like what kind of printer they're using and how much details it can take? Or are they just saying the size and you're determining the details based on the size?
So basically, so far I've worked for Lord of the Print, which do like bigger models and smaller models, but they have like these art direction, I would say, where their creatures are like very detailed and all. When you print them, all the details don't come up as they are on the high poly, I would say, in ZBrush. But as I said, like some people like to print them bigger, so it's always like nice to have them. There are also like other companies that do more simpler models, I would say. So usually what I would do is like check the general vibe of the client, I would say. If they have like very detailed models, I think I would like try to do the same level of details. If they have simple models and they are like, oh, we need like this soldier, which is gonna be like very small, then I'm not gonna like bother doing all the detail. But if they're going for we need like this huge creature is going to be printed like as a big statue, I could go with very simple detail, like to match their previous stuff. But if you want to like do something like really badass and like that people are gonna like display on their shelves and all, I think it's cooler like to have all the details and all the smaller stuff. And also something different also about the pipeline, I would say, like the difference between video gaming and VFX and 3D printing is that your mesh should be like watertight. So if you're like modeling something, you don't have like to have open holes in your mesh. It should be like at least dynameshed before like exporting it to the 3D printer software, because it could like destroy, at least mess up your print. So you gotta like figure out, is it worth it like to make if you're making bandages, is it worth it like to make the hole between the different bandages, or is it better to make a full mesh and then just work on the surface of it, all your details? So this is something else that's different between the VFX and the 3D printing, I would say. You don't have like to worry about like what's on the inside, but more like what you're gonna see.
I know you have to cut them up to prep them for printing. Like, how do you decide where you're going to cut things?
Usually I would try like to cut them where it wouldn't be too much visible, if it makes sense. If, for example, a character has a belt and the body going underneath the belt, I think I would cut it where the belt like joins with the body, so when they will assemble it, it won't be too visible. But if you don't have a choice, you have to cut it where you can,
Cut it
in
and hope
order
for the
to
best.
fit. Yeah, you still have like to think in terms of 3D printer as well, because usually most people will have like a certain size of 3D printer. And what I would usually do is have like a box in ZBrush that would be roughly the minimal size of 3D printers, and try to put my model in there to see if some parts are like going out of there, and try to like scale the model and cut it according to this box.
That's smart. I didn't think about that. That's a cool way of working for that.
I assume mostly it's resin printing for miniatures, right, as well?
To be honest, I mostly work on the sculpting part of the printing, not really the printing part. So I don't really know, to be honest.
I've watched a printer print, but I've never actually done anything.
You said you worked on a printing project, Crystal. What was it?
It was just a print for a friend, and a friend wanted, like, basically a friend was going to print the thing for my friend, so I prepped a file that they made, but that was pretty much it. Like, it was a really touch and go based on the instructions he gave me, so it wasn't much of a knowledge side of things. It was more just like, do what he said.
It's certainly a cool avenue for character artists to pursue that perhaps didn't exist a few years ago. Technically you've had modelers for miniature games and things for quite some time, but the 3D printing market has sort of erupted in recent years, really.
Yeah, toys everywhere.
I think that the more time goes and the more like people are like buying more advanced 3D printers, so they can like print really cool HD stuff, I would say. So that's also why we like to do a lot of details back at Lord of the Print, because with some people having like some 8K printers, you can really do like really detailed prints at the end. So that is nice.
Yeah, that is pretty juicy stuff.
I need to get into this someday.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's definitely going to be very big, and in a way, it could be quite good to move away from like injection molded plastic, which has sort of been a big part. One of the bigger production methods for miniatures and stuff. So, I mean, resin's not a much better material, but the idea that people can print stuff at home, greatly reducing kind of travel and distribution and these kind of costs. If someone can just get the file and print it at home, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I actually wanted to buy myself a 3D printer, but unfortunately I have like no room to store it, I would say, because from what I've heard, you need like a very well ventilated area. And
You do for resin, sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's toxic.
exactly.
But, there's another kind of
Whatever.
printer
Toxic's okay.
that can breathe that in. Doesn't harm.
Extra flavor.
There's another kind of printer that's the one you see that kind of prints stuff with the lines, right? The FDM ones, but they're not very good for things like miniatures because, again, they leave the lines, which kind of looks a bit rubbish on a model. But
Yeah,
good
I
for other
agree.
stuff. Hopefully the technology will just keep getting better and better, and we can get higher fidelity stuff with better printers, and maybe they can get something that works in a non-toxic way, or they can purify the fumes or whatever. And it's exciting tech, at least, to see come out. Like the idea of being able to print all that stuff at home.
Exactly.
Big.
Print all the
I mean,
monsters.
At least it just opens up more job paths for modelers, and especially character modelers. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like there's film, there's games, and now there's printing. So there's a lot more jobs out there for us.
I think that the toy market is an overlooked one, really. There is kind of this big market in there for collectible stuff, statues, figures. You see some cool stuff on ArtStation pop up from time to time of people sculpting like those crazy like Dragon Ball Z statues and stuff. It's just people don't really think about it as a kind of career, right?
But some people do it full time, and they just make toys, and they just pop out toys all day, and that's their job. And I don't know. I think that's really cool. They're kind of it's kind of like a freelance job because you're just working at home, but you just work for a lot of these different toy creators. And
I mean, in terms of work, it's also like really interesting because since you don't have like to worry about making the low poly, make the UVs, make the texturing and all that stuff, you just like focus on the 3D sculpt, and I would say it's more like you focus on the art and how it's gonna look like, if it's gonna look like badass or whatever, and it's less like technical, I would say, because you don't have like to worry about like all the stuff I said before, like texturing and optimizing and putting it into engine.
It's a bit of a niche at the minute, but I think that if you are a character modeler and that is something you're interested in, it's definitely worth looking into as a alternate path or stuff to do on the side.
Yeah, exactly.
or there's NFTs. Just kidding.
We won't get into that. But on but kind of on that note, I wanted to jump us into some Patreon questions. So we have a couple of questions. This first one I envision might be quite short. Have either of you ever tried to sculpt in Blender, and how does it compare to ZBrush?
Never use Blender.
Same, basically. I've never used Blender for anything, but even not for sculpting. But I think Blender is like getting on par with ZBrush, like the more updates they roll in, because I know some people like that sculpt fully on Blender. Maybe they don't do like crazy stuff like in ZBrush with all the features that the ZBrush has, but I think it can be a really nice software like to do basic sculpting in it. But
Yeah,
unfortunately,
I
I
agree.
don't know much about it. So
I think like I've seen people do some really cool sculpts in Blender, but I don't know. I think it's just like from my experience, like Blender is my next software to learn, but ZBrush has just been at it so long, and they specialize in the sculpting craft, so all their tools are just so much further developed because of the fact that that's all they do. But
Except the
Blender's
UI.
so wide that, you model in it like Maya, you sculpt in it like ZBrush, you light, blah, 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 right? So they can't kind of get on the same level as ZBrush because it's not a specialized software.
I think Blender's
in my observational experience.
Blender's always struggled a bit from not being a professional software. So like the advantage of it being open source and free is also a bit of a downside in that it's not designed as something to be used by professionals who work with it day in, day out, ZBrush is. So it's got its quirks, it's got its missing things. It's also got its cool features that other things don't have, because being open source, people are welcome to come in and just make a thing, right? Like if you're really passionate about making something crazy, you can go and add it. But that also means that people are less likely to go and put in the kind of more tedious but necessary little things that a more professional software already kind of has.
Yeah, it definitely has its pros and its cons. But as a non-user, it's hard for me to judge it entirely, but only just based off of what videos I've watched and stuff I've seen. But trust me, it's on the list.
I've actually been planning on picking up Blend also, but haven't had the chance yet or the time.
That's the problem. Where do we buy more time? Can money buy more time?
That's the thing I need. Yeah, I definitely want to make the switch from Maya to Blender for my personal stuff, and just things outside of work. Just because it's, I mean, nothing else free is a big attraction, but there's a lot of things it does as well that I think it does better than. It does some things worse. It does some things better. So it's about,
choosing your battles.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Next question. So this one is not particularly related to characters, but I think it is quite an interesting question. How do you approach working on multiple projects at the same time? So obviously, like, you've done quite a lot with doing the printing stuff and your day job stuff, and I think at one point you were even doing ArtStation Challenge at the same time. How do you kind of juggle all of this stuff? Do you have any tips or advice?
So basically, that wasn't an easy period of time. I have to admit. But usually, what I would do is I have my schedule for my day job at Ubisoft. So from 9 to 6:30, I have to work. I have to work for Ubisoft. Then I would have a break basically, and then after that break, I would work for a few hours on the printing stuff or the ArtStation Challenge. When the ArtStation Challenge started, it wasn't the smartest thing I did, to pick up the challenge at the same time. But what I managed to do is I would say postponing the 3D print stuff for later. So basically deciding which one is gonna come out first, because the challenge was limited in time, and the 3D printing project, I had some more time to spare on it, so I could take the time off from this and just switching to the ArtStation Challenge. So basically managing your priorities is something really important to consider in that case. And I guess otherwise taking breaks from work just to relax and to chill and not to fall into despair is also a good idea. Otherwise, I think the most important part would be to have a nice schedule and plan all your next steps. So if you can make a list and make a nice planning of all you have to do on the project, it can really help you going through it, I would say.
That's exactly what I do as well. Like when I'm working on 50 different things, which happens a lot, it's all about that schedule. So you work full time and then you just make that schedule to, I usually write down everything that needs to be done in the project up till the end. And I'll just kind of do as I would do for anything is bid my time, say like, okay, modeling might take me 5 days and texturing might take me 10 days, like whatever time I think it will take me. And then I'll know like a rough deadline of how long something will take me. And then I try not to get hung up on stuff. So like, that's the biggest problem when you're an artist, is you just have this perfectionist mind. And if you don't actually have a deadline for personal projects, or if you do have a deadline because it's something you have to actually submit, then that's even better because you know when you have to finish it by, and you won't get hung up on stuff. But when it's a personal project, I find a lot of people leave their projects unfinished because they don't actually give themselves any sort of schedule. And you won't really improve much if you don't finish anything at all. You'll just get stuck in that first step of the project every single time, and you'll never get over the second hump, right? So I think improving is all about setting the schedule, and if you don't like it that time, well, tough, do the next one, and you'll probably like it more the next time, right? Because you'll get faster and faster at doing the process.
That's true. And also, I think it's also the thing that I talked about earlier while talking about the 3D print stuff. Basically, you have like a set amount of time that you can like spare for this project. And if you know that this project will take you like, I don't know, 3 days, then you're not gonna, like Crystal said, get hung up on all the details on the armor or all the stuff on the bandages or whatever. So you're gonna go to the simpler shapes and then move on. And that's also what I did for the ArtStation challenge and the freelance project at that time. You start like to understand what type of how deep you can go into the project, I would say. So basically, if you say I have like 3 days to do the high poly, maybe 3 days is a bit not a lot, but anyway. So we have 3 days to do the high poly. Then, for example, this part of the character, you won't like make it that detailed, and then move on the next part of the character, and then I don't know, move on to the texturing, and then move on to the presentation and all. So you also have like to manage what type of end result you'd like to have with this time frame, I would say.
Yeah. And then I would also say, like, exactly what you said is what I do to not go crazy and actually not have burnout is I schedule in my days off. So, sometimes I'll be like, okay, after work on Tuesdays and Thursdays is when I'm going to work on, personal projects or freelance or whatever. And Wednesdays, Mondays, and Fridays are going to be days that I just go to the gym and hang out at home and watch TV. And because then you kind of have like a set schedule for yourself in your spare time. You're not just constantly lounging and Netflixing.
Yeah.
And you're also not constantly working and burning out.
Allocating time definitely helps. I notice it's if you don't have like set times to do stuff, time just vanishes. Right? It's just gone. You're like, I had all day to do this thing. I feel like I watched 2 episodes of Netflix and now it's like 4 p.m. Like, what happened? But it just, time just goes. But if you get up and you're kind of like, all right, I'll spend, on Saturday, I'll spend up till lunchtime working on this thing. And then after that, I'll just take the rest of the time off. You'll get so much more done.
Yeah, exactly.
30 minutes of work is better than nothing. And most of the time, that's the hardest part, is sitting down to do the extra work, right? So sometimes it's just about like, saying, okay, for 30 minutes, I'm going to do something. I'll make a little bit of progress. And sometimes you'll get so into it, you'll stay. And sometimes you're just not feeling it and you'll go do something else. But the rule for me is like, Tuesdays are the day that I work, right? So I'm going to try my best. If I don't get into it, then at least I've done an hour or 30 minutes or whatever my personal agreement was. And, then I do the rest of the day with whatever I want,
Yeah, that is true that most of the time when, for example, you're struggling to start working, just like starting up ZBrush or Maya or whatever software you're using and doodling or doing some stuff can like get you into it, and then you're just like working for a few hours and you forget to eat and yeah.
Literally.
Oh, for sure. All right. I think that answers our Patreon question. So in lieu of Luan having to jump out, he's left me some bonus question. So I'm going to give you one of his questions here. If you guys could sculpt any character or monster from anything, what would it be?
Smog. Lord of the Rings.
Morg. Big old dragony boy.
Yeah. I would love to sculpt him, but I don't have the patience for scales like Mike does. So,
I mean, to be honest, the scales I usually do are done via a thing on ZBrush called VDM. So basically, you sculpt a bunch of scales and then you place them. It's like an alpha in 3D.
See, I never got into the VDM brushes as much as I should have, and I think I will now. You know what? Smog is next on the list.
Nice. I mean, it's not too complex, so you shouldn't have any problem like picking it up. It's just like...
No, but have you seen his eyes? Those are crazy. So detailed.
Yes. Honestly, personally for me, I wouldn't model Smog because I've done a few dragons. So I don't really know actually what I would like to sculpt, I guess. I'm a lot into like I really like creepy stuff or Lovecraftian stuff and that kind of these kind of creatures. So I think I would like to do some really out of this world eldritch creatures. But yeah, for now I do dragons and crocodiles.
I think one other thing I would like to do is something with like feathers, because every time I look at something with feathers, I nearly have a heart attack. But I mean, that's not necessarily 100% sculpting. I think I would probably like do a groom of feathers and stuff, but some sort of bird would be next on my list.
You're a crazy bird man. Yeah, the Cthulhu type stuff you're talking about reminded me of the all the Bloodborne bosses and stuff. There's some pretty wacky stuff in there.
Yeah, basically.
You could do a crazy FromSoft boss, but actually in high resolution.
What
no
are you
comment
trying
on
to say,
FromSoft game graphics at all.
We're picking your next project, Mike. Pay attention.
Nice. Yeah. So From Software boss HD.
Yes.
I want
full res.
A giant amygdala
3D print
one as a 3D print with those long crazy arms that they have. He's not.
We expect it tomorrow.
Enthusiastic about this one. We might not get this one, Crystal.
No. Pay someone else.
All right. Well, on that note, I think I'm going to wrap us up there. So, thank you very much, Crystal and Mike, for joining us to have a chat.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It was fun.
Pleasure. Yeah.
And thanks to Luan for the time he was here. You're welcome.
Thank you, Luan.
Yeah, pleasure. And thank you guys for listening in. On the usual note of things I say about EXP, yeah, do go on the website, do come and join us on Discord and have a chat. But in new EXP news, we actually have some mentorships that are going to be starting out. We're going to have mentorships for environments, props, materials, lighting, characters, and career advice. Both Crystal and Mike are actually mentors for the character mentorships. We'll have some, presumably I'll pop a link in the description down there, hopefully, if you want to check out some more details on that. And there'll definitely be more stuff over on the website, so that's very exciting. And other than that, tune in next month. Thanks for listening, and until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.